Today, we're gonna do a two-tool build. We're only gonna use 2 tools to build a Parsons Table Desk. It's gonna be amazing. Hi, I'm Michael. This is Maker's Workshop. Today, we're gonna make a Parsons writing desk table using only 2 tools. The Mikita Subcompact Impact Drill and the Makita rear-handled circular saw. Thank you to the Home Depot for sponsoring this build. Let's get right to it. The raw materials for this desk are 1x2 and 1x8 poplar. Alright, so the first step is we're going to take our stock lumber and we're just going to cut it down a little bit longer than we need each one of the finished pieces to be. To do that, I'm going to use the Makita rear-handled circular saw. Now we're going to do some measuring. When working with limited tools, I always find it easiest to get wood that is already dimensioned to the widths that'll fit right in the project without needing to be ripped down. The finished legs were going to be 28¼ inches long, so I initially cut my narrower pieces of poplar into 30-inch sections. Each leg is going to need 2 of these sections, so I cut 8 of these total. In an attempt to use as few tools as possible, I'm not using clamps or anything here, and the circular saw was able to handle it quickly and with precision. Alright, so now I'm going to cut the rough pieces for the top of the desk. Once again, I measured out a section a bit longer than I needed for my finished dimension and cut it down. So for today we have our top roughed out and we have 4 sets of legs. And now it's time to glue them up. I covered my work surface in wax paper to prep for the glue up. So since I'm trying to do this with only 2 tools, I am not going to use clamps. Bold move, I know. Because it is a square piece, it is not that big, we're going to use painter's tape as the clamps for these. Should work. I think. We will see. I coated both sides of what will become the interior of each leg with a generous coat of wood glue. And then I stuck them together and started pulling the 2 sides together using strips of painter's tape. I'm looking to pull the tape tight enough that we get glue squeeze out along the full seam because the squeeze out indicated that there was full contact between the 2 edges for a nice bond after it dries. Alright, that's all the legs. I'm going to let these sit for a little bit. I'm not really too worried about it. I've done this before. It should work just fine. Let's go figure out the table top. These pieces had a pretty nice factory edge, so I knew the edges would line up about as well as you can hope for when you aren't using a joiner. I coated one side with wood glue again and then added a few dots of CA glue. I sprayed activator on the other edge and with Brooks' help pushed the 2 sides together. The CA glue hardens instantly and will serve as the clamp as the wood glue hardens more slowly to form a nice and secure bond. We're going to call that good enough. It is not going to be the strongest joint, but we will address that in the next step. While I had my circular saw out, I cut a few more pieces of the thinner poplar that'll become an apron for the desktop. Oh yeah. And then, on a whim, I added some more CA glue down the center of the seam and activated it with the spray. And then I waited 2 hours for the wood glue to dry. Alright, it's been 2 hours. Let's take a look at what we have. It's stuck together, so that's a good start. So there are some little gaps along where the seam is. So we're just gonna mix up some wood putty using sawdust. Since this is gonna be painted, we don't need to worry about getting exact color matches. After that, I pulled the tape off of the legs and checked to see if those needed any putty as well. There's a couple spots where it didn't quite get full contact, so there's just a little bit of a gap. I pulled some sawdust out of my sander. I added glue, a little bit at a time until the consistency was how I wanted it. It should hold its shape when put into place, but still needs to be soft and moldable. I pressed this into the gaps and cracks as needed and scraped off the excess. I used a damp cloth to give everything a quick wipe down. I wanted to get this as clean as possible in preparation for sanding. Product placement!
It's not, though.
Oh. Everything that I did last night is looking great, but it definitely needs to be sanded. And since we did not make a sander one of the two tools, I will be sanding everything with this sheet of sandpaper and this sanding sponge. It's gonna be fun. Always go with the grain. Take your time. It will take forever. When you think you might be done, do it again. All right. That's it. They're all sanded. Whew. Just kidding. I used a rotary sander. But you could do it this way if you really wanted to. But the important thing is they're done, they're sanded, and it's time for the next step. I'm going to mark my final dimensions for these boards, and I'm going to cut them down using the same saw that we used before. This should be a great way to see how the saw performs on longer cuts. To get these final dimensions nice and precise, I first squared off one side, leaving a bit of excess, so I can then measure off the first edge to the opposite edge. So it's perfect. Oh yeah! The Makita circular saw handled these cuts well. Got it. I got nice square corners just freehanding it.
Yeah.
Not bad. Then I repeated this process to get the 4 legs to their final dimensions. So far, to get to this point, I just want to point out that we have only used one of our 2 tools, not counting the sander. And if you don't flip it over, it looks like a desk. I'm going to cut the apron, which will let us try out the built-in angle gauge to see how accurate that is, because we're going to put a 90-degree miter on it. 45-degree miter on it. We will just simplify it and say we're going to put a miter on it. Let's do it. That sounds right. It's got like a quick slide thing. Well, that was really easy. I marked where I needed to make cuts on those extra thin pieces that I had previously cut and went for it. It was now time to go in with the Makita Compact Impact Driver. I'm going to be using screws to get the apron in place. I marked on each part of the apron where exactly I wanted to make my holes. And then propped up the edge I was working on with some scrap. This will make it easier to drill into the side. First, I'm using a number 8 countersink bit to make a hole through both pieces. This leaves a nice pocket for the head of the screw to sit in that we can later fill with putty. I am adding a thin strip of wood glue to each edge for extra security, and then I went ahead and screwed everything into place using 2-inch screws. It came together really nicely. To fill in any gaps on the work surface of the desk, I applied a thin bead of wood glue and then worked some more sawdust into that to have the same wood putty effect as before. After this had the chance to dry overnight, I used my Makita random orbital sander to get the surface of the desk nice and smooth. Now we're going to attach the legs to the top. And to do that, I'm just going to do wood glue with a little bit of CA glue again. I'm going to ignore this top part. I'm not going to use that to level it. I'm going to press it against these 2 edges to secure it, to keep it as straight as possible. The edge of the apron, by doing it this way, will serve as a corner clamp. As long as I apply pressure this direction, and don't worry about if there's a little bit of wobble, the wood glue will fill that in and it should be nice and solid at the end. This method worked out just how I'd hoped it would, and then I wiped down my excess glue. Alright, I'm just going to do that 3 more times, and then we will have a desk. All 4 legs are on. It's been sitting for about an hour, so it should be solid enough for me to flip over. Let's flip it over and see what we have. One of the things that impressed me about the new Makita tools was that we were able to complete the whole project with just 1 battery set, including the sanding, without needing to charge it once. I'm just going to go back in any areas that there's still any gaps. I'm going to mix up another batch of wood putty and I'm just going to smush it into those areas. It's the same process that we already showed, so I'm going to do it off camera. And this is going to be painted once it's delivered to its final home. However, I wanted to add a layer of filler primer myself to provide a nice even canvas for painting. This primer is sandable and also fills in even the tiniest bumps to completely camouflage all of the wood putty spots. Even the spots where the screw heads are hidden under putty should be virtually invisible. I took my time getting a nice even coat of primer on every angle of this desk. And then it was done. I think the table desk came out great. And all in all, it went together pretty easily. We'll have links down below for everything that we used in this build. Feel free to go check it out, and we'll see you next week.